Boker Tov, Chaverim, and welcome once again to a Heartfelt Haftarah. It is time for us to rejoin the diaspora calendar and the Israel calendar. They will merge together again so that we are no longer off a beat from what our conservative and Orthodox co-religionists are doing here in America. Everybody is celebrating Parshat Pinchas this week, celebrating a bit of an overwrought word. It's a disturbing story about a priest, grandson of Aaron, who kills a bunch of Israelites who are stooping a bunch of Moabites, and it's an odd story. But in any case, it's important for our Haftarah because what links the two together is that our Haftarah is about Elijah, the prophet, Eliyahu HaNavi, whom we sing about on a regular basis, one of the most popular characters in Jewish folk tradition. And there is an assumed connection between these two. One, because both of these men are quite zealous. If Pinchas kills a whole bunch of Israelites in order to demonstrate God's displeasure with them boinking other people, Elijah, perhaps in a little bit more of a justifiable nationalist outburst, slays a whole bunch of prophets of Baal and Asherah in a confrontation on Mount Carmel. So these are both dangerous prophets, ruthless men, and yet somehow we don't embrace Pinchas with a great deal of enthusiasm, but we love Elijah. So how did this killer become a hero of Jewish tradition? Well, so let's get to it, and let's talk about our Haftarah portion, which comes from, I believe, it is Second Kings. Is it Second Kings or First Kings? I always forget this. It's First Kings chapter 18. Forgive me. So anyway, let's do some tent peg stuff. We're going to spend most of our time talking about Elijah as he's portrayed in the Bible, but then also his transubstantiation into a folk hero. So Elijah is one of the early prophets, a former prophet. Remember that terminology, which is to say that what we know about him, we know about from stories about him, rather than so much from his own writings or his own testimonies or the oracles he wrote down. So he already starts out as a narrative hero. Um, in keeping with the prophets of the northern kingdom, and he is a prophet of the northern kingdom, he's a prophet, also a bit of a revolutionary, which sort of gets us to the slaying the prophets of Baal thing. He's a nationalist, obviously, in that sense, but it's clearly bound up with the belief that the Israelites must obey the covenant that was made at Mount Sinai, and Mount Sinai will be a feature that plays in this particular story. So Elijah, a Tishbaite, comes from the east side of the Jordan River. So if you recall your Israelite settlement narrative, several of the tribes, Gad and Reuben, settle on the eastern side of the Jordan, what we today would call Jordan, the country Jordan, in the area just below the Golan Heights, maybe even in the Golan Heights. And they are semi-nomadic, they're herdsmen. They don't seem to have created a lot of permanent settlements, though Gilead is probably the most famous of. Anyway, Elijah comes from this territory, which is under the purview of the northern kingdom. And he comes to challenge the behavior of the then king of the northern kingdom, Ahab. Ahab, of course, becomes a name associated with infidelity, and particularly he marries a Phoenician wife, a queen, Jezebel. And gosh, if he gets a lousy reputation, she gets a terrible reputation. And of course, the word Jezebel is still with us. So Elijah finds himself on a collision course with Ahab because of his tolerance of all these foreign gods, which are now creeping into Israelite practice brought by his Phoenician wife. And so suddenly we've got temples to Baal, we've got temples to Asherah, uh, and Israelites are being seduced by these practices. That too takes us back to the story of Pinchas and the seduction, literal and metaphorical, of the Israelites in the Torah portion Pinchas. So anyway, Elijah confronts the king, has a contest with the prophets of Baal. He makes a fool out of them, and then he kills a bunch of them and tells the Israelites to overthrow Baal worship in the kingdom. He wants to demonstrate that he is not disloyal to the king, but is acting in the king's best interest by, after the contest and after the death of all the prophets, he literally serves as a runner for the king's chariot running before him. If we were to draw a contemporary parallel, Prigozhin and the Wagner group insists that what they were doing was a mutiny against bad generalship in the Russian army, but they were not plotting against President Putin. Sometimes, these kinds of distinctions are hard to make, but apparently that's the message Elijah gives. However, immediately Jezebel is not mollified by his show of loyalty. I mean, all of her prophets have just been killed. And so she makes a conditional self curse. She says, "May this and more happen to me if you are not dead by the time I'm done." This is a threat said to Elijah. So, cross my heart and hope to die if I don't, see you hanging from a pole in the next couple of days. So that forces Elijah to flee. His triumph suddenly gets reversed, and now he's a fugitive on the run. And our Haftarah portion takes us on his journey. Let's put away our tent peg. So, what is this journey? Well, this journey, interestingly enough, is a kind of symbolic reenactment of the journey to Mount Sinai. And it may be that he is going to Mount Sinai, though that is never named. So he finds himself in the wilderness. He has no provisions, he has nothing. But he falls asleep in the wilderness and he wakes up, and there an angel of God says, "There's food waiting for you." And indeed, there's something to drink, and there's some cooked pitas waiting for him. And I think this is meant for us to think of the manna that was given to the Israelites as they make their journey. And then in an entirely coincidental number, it takes him 40 days and 40 nights to get to the location he's going to. There he ascends the mountain and he finds shelter in a cave. Again, probably meant to parallel the story of Moses asking to see God's goodness portrayed before him. And it says, "Stand in the cleft of a rock," in the book of Exodus in chapter 34. So this is a typology. We're going to have a type of revelation like Moses had. So Elijah is in the cave. He hears a voice call to him. He comes out to the edge of the cave, and he hears what is described as God asking Elijah, "Why are you here? Why have you come?" And then Elijah pours out his distress. I've been incredibly zealous for you, and yet here I am. I find myself a fugitive. I feel like everything I've done is for no good purpose. And then Elijah receives a revelation. Uh, we are told that there is fire and there is thunder and there is wind, and everything that you expect at Mount Sinai is happening to Elijah, just as it happened to Moses. But then it has the little addendum with each one of these uh, semi-natural, supernatural, awesome phenomena. It says, but God was not in the fire, or but God was not in the wind. And then it concludes with a remarkable twist on the Sinai story. And we are told that Elijah hears the voice of sheer silence. Ooh, paradoxical, right? On several levels. First of all, that the God who was so thunderous and shocking at Mount Sinai that the rabbis even said that his voice made people faint or even die hearing it. Instead, what he hears is the voice of sheer silence, or the sound of sheer silence, itself a paradox, the sound of sheer silence. That sound is, I feel like I've heard that sound. That's the sound of the desert. That's the sound when there's nothing there, but there is an auditory presence. And that's the voice of God that Elijah hears, the small, sometimes translated as the small, still voice, which is a very nice translation, but it doesn't get to the full paradox of the sound of sheer silence. So, anyway, in that sound, Elijah hears God command him to proceed forward and establish a successor. So he sends him on a journey, and Elijah is going to find the prophet who is going to succeed him, Elisha, which he does at the end of this Haftarah portion. And that Elisha is going to literally take up his mantle. And in the subsequent story, Elijah famously will be taken up into heaven in a divine chariot, and that sets into motion our folk tradition about Elijah, and the idea that Elijah can return to the earth, so because he's never died. So that's our Haftarah portion, and if I were to draw anything in particular out of it, what I'd like to emphasize is an important shift in the way the Bible talks about how we communicate with God. That our early stories always involved a manifestation of God in some extraordinary fashion, whether it be physical phenomena, semi-physical phenomena, mighty angels, etc., etc. But what we see as we go on is the idea that God speaks to us, oftentimes not in a loud, theophonic, awesome message, but sometimes in the voice of conscience, speaks to us through our asking ourselves questions. And we hear a small, still voice that steers us in a certain direction. I think that becomes incredibly important for us to think about, because God does not manifest his herself in the way we hear about it in the Torah, but God does often manifest itself in the wilderness, in nature, when we're alone, speaking to us not in a cacophony, but in a small voice inviting us to think about what needs to be done next. And I think that that is the great lesson of this particular Torah portion, which both uses and subverts the story of the revelation of Mount Sinai. We'll run into Elijah again, so I will put off talking about uh, Elijah's evolution into a folk hero for a future session. But that is our Haftarah for this week. Thank you all, and we'll be talking next week.